Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Unlock the Potential of the Paris Region Tech Ecosystem. My name is Daphne and I will be your host today. Hello, Clément. So just before we get started and waiting for more people to connect, just a few housekeeping items. So this webinar is being recorded. You will have access to the replay just at the end of the session. You can use the chat tab to comment on the discussion. And if you have any questions for the speaker, please head to the question tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to the question during the Q&A. And so, as I said, my name is Daphne Lora. I am the US representative for Choose Paris Region, and I am very happy today to be joined by my colleague Cécile. It's actually her first week, and she's already on the webinar. So, Cécile, if you can show your face and say a little hello to the guest. Yes.
Yes. Hey everyone, so I'm working in the Paris region now with Daphne, and I will be moderating the chat today. So please ask your question in the dedicated tab, and we will be happy to ask them to the speakers at the end. So have a good webinar.
Thank you, Cécile. So for those of you who don't know Choose Paris Region yet, we're the Paris Region Government Agency. Our mission is to promote the Paris region and support international companies looking to set up in France. So what does that mean? It means that from your initial decision making to setting up your French entity and beyond, we are here to help you by connecting you to the local ecosystem, giving you market insight, helping you with your go-to-market strategy, connecting you with your experts, legal, tax experts, helping you finding your office space, recruiting your team, and providing you more information so that your company can grow and thrive in the Paris region. So today we are going to try to unlock the potential of the Paris region tech ecosystem, and I'm really happy to be joined by amazing speaker. And first we have Alexandre Wilter. He's a French serial entrepreneur living in New York with ventures on both sides of the Atlantic. Alexandre, welcome. Can you tell us a bit more about your background and what you're doing at Norbert Health?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Alex. I started my first company out of a research lab in France a long time ago at INRIA. Back then I was a researcher in computer vision, and we started my first company that eventually brought me to the United States. I've been in the US now for 17 years, and started two other companies in the meantime. The last one is called Norbert Health, and we make devices to monitor and measure and scan your vital signs without contact, right? So it's all a box. I'm going to show it to you. I'll pitch my box where I'm there, right? So this is what it looks like. So it's very small form factor, super easy to use, and it's going to measure your heart rate, breathing rate, some indication of your blood pressure, your temperature, all of that within 10 to 15 seconds. You just have to stand within a meter from the box. So we use it in healthcare environments right now, healthcare providers, hospitals. Our first deployments in hospitals are happening at the end of this month, very soon. And the company is really was incorporated and started in the U.S. My partner, co-founder, is in the U.S. and but it's interesting because we have investors from both sides of the Atlantic from the beginning. We raised 2 rounds of money, and both rounds were a mix of European, actually French and American investors. And the company now is actually mostly in Paris. We have 9 employees in Paris now, and we're 4 here in Brooklyn, where I'm calling you from.
Great, and I think we'll have the time to explore this, and thank you for this introduction. And so next we have Chris O'Brien. Chris is a journalist expert in the European tech ecosystem, and Chris actually just moved from south of France to the Paris region. So a warm welcome to you, Chris. And can you tell us a bit more about your new venture with the French Tech Journal?
Sure. Well, it's wonderful to be here. So thank you for inviting me. Always happy to talk about France and the Paris region. I have been a technology journalist primarily for almost more than 25 years now, with most of my career in Silicon Valley, covering the tech scene there, and I assume everyone's heard of Silicon Valley. I moved to France, to Toulouse in 2014, and had been, until recently, working as European correspondent for VentureBeat, a tech news site based in Silicon Valley. And more recently, I started the French Tech Journal, which is a newsletter and podcast focused on French, the global community of French entrepreneurs. And it turned out the timing was pretty good this year because that global community has gone crazy.
Yes, and hold on that thought because we will just start with that in a moment.
Yeah.
And last but not least, we have Betty Quinchon from AFIGEC joining us. So Betty is head of the international office, and with our partners, she just launched a new website called Setting Up Your Business in France. So I think this is self-explanatory, but Betty, can you tell us a bit more about what you do?
So hello everyone. So I'm based in Paris. I'm a partner of a firm of 300 people. I'm head of the international department, and we help firm setting up in France and developing their business and increasing. And so we are, as we are 300 people, we've got a HR department, a legal, a tax department. So we can assist our clients on many subjects. And so, as you said, I've created also a website giving some data to the foreign people wanting to set up in France, but with a banker, an insurer, and a lawyer, so that we are the one-stop. We like to be the one-stop shop and to help our clients.
Great, and I'm sure you have valuable insight today for the people listening. So just before we dig into our discussion, I wanted to share a bit of context about why we thought it was a good time to have this webinar today. So as you know, we've been living in the context of a global pandemic for the last year and a half, but thanks to the vaccination, the world is reopening. So as of today, we have more than half of the French population that has received at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine, and we have 46% that have received all doses. So that's great news. And since June, the United States has been put on the green list of countries allowed to travel to France. What does that mean? It means that you don't need a compelling reason to travel anymore. It means you can travel for business and leisure. And if you are fully vaccinated, you have no restriction. And if you are not, you will need a PCR test, but you don't need to quarantine anymore. You might have heard that on July 12th, the president announced that French residents will be required to use a health pass to access some public spaces. It's still unclear if the health pass will be necessary for international travelers, because you might know that the application do not recognize the vaccines done in other countries. So please monitor all this traveling information. Ceci will be able to share in the chat links so you can follow the vaccination rate in France and also the latest news. But as of for now, you can plan your business trip to France, and we hope to see you there soon. And so to give you a bit of numbers about US companies in France. So USA is the first country in terms of foreign direct investment and job creation in France. In 2020, despite of the crisis, we had more than 200 US projects setting up, like US companies setting up in France and creating over 8,000 jobs. And 1/3 of these are in the Paris region. And as of for now, we have more than 4,500 US companies in France. And France is the second country welcoming US company in Europe after the UK. So this is why today we wanted to invite you to join the first tech and business ecosystem in Europe. And this is where I will turn to our speaker, and I guess we can get rid of this presentation so we have everyone on stage. And so my first question will be for Chris. So you've been, looking at the French ecosystem for so many years now, and the last 2 years and 2020 has been kind of crazy in terms of investment, unicorns popping up. So can you tell us a bit more what is happening in France and Paris region right now?
Well, I would just start with the last 6 months in France. And, when we talk about France and the big numbers, it's important to recognize that France remains a very centralized country. So for the most part, we're still talking about Paris when we talk a lot about these big fundraisings. And what we've seen since January is really an astonishing run of 9-figure fundraisings. The kind of rounds that only would have been maybe 1 or 2 per year at most, going back a few years. Now they seem to be happening almost every week as more mature tech companies really start to attract later stage fundraising. I think it's hard to keep up with the count, but I think there's 16 new unicorns since the start of the year. And so it's really gone into overdrive. And of course, the larger context is that we're seeing a global flood of money into tech. And the good news is the French Paris ecosystem has advanced to the point where there are enough mature companies to attract that kind of international investment.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And have you seen any sectors getting more tractions recently?
I would say there's several areas that I would consider the strength of the French tech ecosystem. AI being one of them, a category that in Europe we kind of refer to broadly as deep tech. So quantum computing as an example of that. Any kind of startup that's really sort of science related, we've seen a big growth there. B2B marketplaces, things that involve some kind of data solution. So I think of France as a place, AI is a part of that, but I think of France and Paris in general as a place where there's a lot of real AI data talent that is driving the creation of a lot of companies in those sectors.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we'll talk a bit more about talent a bit after. But as for the Paris region, we recently launched AI Pack and Quantum Pack to specifically support startup in these sectors. And I want to turn to Alex. Do you agree with that? And why did you choose to come back to France to set up the subsidiary of Norbert else? What were the reasons that drove you? I think you're on mute.
Yeah, the phrase of the year, right? You're on mute. Sorry about that. I think about a T-shirt like you're on mute. So yeah, with Norbert, it was super interesting, right? We started in 2019, pre-COVID, and then so we started building the company here in the U.S., right? Because I live like literally 10 minutes, bike ride from here. And my partner too. So, it was really convenient to be here. We started building up the company and then COVID hit, right? So we already had a couple of engineers, as always, right? When you look for very specific talents like AI, computer vision, in our case, there's also some radar processing that's involved. So there are some skill sets like that are kind of easier to find in France. And so we already had a couple of engineers in France and a couple of engineers here. And when COVID struck, we were like, okay, how are we gonna extend our runway? And then we just looked at the quality and the cost of the engineers in France. And with the help of the governments and all the multiple grants you can get to develop like core R&D project in the Paris region, but in France in general, there was just no question, right? We just started hiring everyone in France. So all the further employees from there on in the software team were all 100% in France. And so now I'm trying to balance again a little bit. So we're hiring some people in the US because I think the multicultural aspect of a tech team is super important. So I'm trying to have a couple more engineers here, and because our hardware manufacturing and production is really located here, we have to have some software that is close to the manufacturing part. So there has to be some people here. But yeah, this is how it happened originally. So we started from like some talent that we couldn't find here, and then the cost and the quality of the resources was such that there was absolutely no question.
Okay, great. And since you were mentioning the R&D tax credit, I'm turning to Betty. So this is actually one of the huge benefits you can have when you're a company setting up in France. And even if you're a foreign company, as soon as you have a French entity, you can benefit from that. Can you tell us a bit more about what this is, the R&D tax credit?
Okay, the tax credit is a is a credit based on your R&D development that you can have whatever your sector is. So it's based. At least the only requirement is that your entity must have less than 250 employees, and your turnover must be less of 50 million euro, meaning 59 million USD. So, and a total balance sheet less than 43 million euro. So you must reach a big threshold, quite a high threshold to not be allowed to benefit from it. So quite a lot of entities can be entitled to have this tax credit. You will need to incur innovation costs related to prototype design activities, pilot facilities, new product, and blah blah blah. What can I tell you? The activity must be based on basic research, applied research, or experimental research. So the cover is quite large, and in order to be eligible for RTC, the expenses must be made and located within Europe, within the European economic area. And some of the following expenses that can be part of the credit tax are depreciation allowance for research assets and buildings. Staff, the big advantage is on staff costs for researcher and research technician, and especially for young doctors, because you can have a credit of 100% of their wages, including employers' taxes, for 2 years. So it means that you have them for free, kind of. So it's very, very, very interesting. And the tax credit is on a forfeit of 75% of depreciation allowance and 43% of the staff costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of, I think, numbers to proceed.
There's a lot to say, and I would also say that if you benefit from the tax credit, you may also benefit from the GEI status, which is Jeune Entreprise Innovante, meaning that you can have an additional social and tax exemption, meaning that if you create your entity, if your entity is in France for less than 8 years, and you benefit from the tax credit, and you engage at least 15% per year of R&D development expenses, you may be exempted of corporation tax for 100% for the first year and 50% the second year, and for 8 years, no employer social costs for those engineers.
Okay, and I just add maybe a little. There is no limit of employees for the R&D tax credit, so big corporation can also benefit from it. But some specific grants for innovation will be for smaller company. But I would like to just say that. And so, as you see, there's a lot of numbers here. But as we say when we introduce it on our site, like basically you can get back 30% of your expenses, and so you can work with an expert to really file this paperwork. But Alexandre, did you already benefit from the R&D tax credit for Norbert Health? Can you share some numbers, or is it?
No, yeah. From I mean, we incorporated a subsidiary in France, and from the first day we started hiring R&D engineers, and we got JEI, and GOE, and TIR tax credit. We're also applying for. We do pretty deep technology, right? We're merging. Pretty innovative sensors like radar sensors, radio frequency sensors, long wave infrared, and camera. So there's a lot of deep tech in there. So we're also applying for additional loan/grant from the BPI, along with the Paris region, which are super interesting. That can finance up to 50% of a research project. That can be pretty significant. and super helpful. So yeah, we leverage all that.
And so you mentioned, yeah, grants from the Paris region, grants from BPI, which is the public bank from investment, one of the biggest investor in France. Chris, from what you have seen in other European countries or during the crisis, how would you describe the support of the French governments at every level?
Well, let me start by just taking a step back, just kind of building on what Alexandra and Betty were just talking about. I like to tell people that when you think about France, or if you're thinking about coming to France, one of the really critical things that you have to understand is how big of a role the government plays in the economy. It's a very aggressive, may not be the right word, but it's a very active participant. It's not a centralized economy in the way that some people might think, but there is a lot of central planning, industrial policy, and programs at all levels. And so, the first thing I would encourage anybody who's thinking about coming is to really do your research, because the amount of, we were just talking about one program, but there's a huge range of programs available from the national government to the regional to the local. And so certainly you can probably benefit from connecting someone like Betty, who really knows what's available to you, because it can be immense. And frankly, I find even a lot of French companies aren't aware of all the benefits. We're going through that with the France Freelance program. They're so generous that there are parts of it that I think most people here don't even understand, that they could be getting thousands of euros from the government. And in that respect, I think it's pretty generally agreed that the French government has been more aggressive in supporting businesses of all sizes, particularly in the French tech sector. I'm going to forget the latest number, but it's billions of euros that they've put into the sector to support companies whose revenues have been hurt, who were installed as a result of COVID, and continuing to help that sector grow. And I think we've seen the results of that, in that there haven't been the big shutdowns of some of these younger companies that many feared a year ago.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then we have an expert at Choose Paris region to help you, guide you through the different supports you can get, because there are many, but depending on your activity and the number of people you will hire in the future, you will be eligible for one or the other. Since we were talking about talents and the difference between maybe French and American engineers, Alex and Chris, do you want to elaborate on that, on the different kind of maybe we often used to say hire yourself talent in the US and then your engineer in France. Would you agree on that, or would you find talent everywhere?
So Chris, I can take a couple of words if you want on that. I mean, I've seen that change a lot. So this is my third company. All of them had a development office in France, and some engineers in the US or some sales in the US. I think that it's been maybe hard to say when it started, but Paris has become a real international city. While with my last company, Placemeter, Paris was really like a really super French city. I have most of my engineers in Paris, but I think we have a majority who's French, but it's a bare majority, right? We have Swiss people, Germans, we have some Indians, we have people from all over the world now. It's become a lot easier to immigrate to France when you do a tech job, when you have a tech position. So, and that really shows. The language used to be a big barrier, and I think that now you can get away with just English in many parts of Paris, which was not the case at all before. I always remember the first trips of my American sales guys back in around 2000. It was really fun. So they would just barge into a boulangerie speaking loud English, like they didn't even understand. We didn't speak English. So anyway, this has really changed. This makes a big difference, and I think now. I always had a couple of instances where American engineers or employees would want to move to Europe. It was always exotic, right? Like, oh, would you do that? Oh, so amazing, so exciting. But now it's kind of, it becomes something that you do. It's much more common So I think that's a big differentiator. On the flip side, I think you get a lot of help from the government, but the salaries themselves have gone up, right? It's not as dramatic a difference as it used to be. I mean, salaries have gone up in the U.S. too, but it's more comparable now. But again, thanks to the government grants, you end up paying, I would say, the total cost. So if I do all the, if I aggregate everything into the equation, including travels, right? I mean, during COVID years, you don't travel that much, but we're starting to travel again. And all the overhead, you have to get the help from, people like Betty, and there's a little bit of overhead, right? To Chris's point, I mean, the French government is a big entity. You don't want to face them by yourself, right? So you have to get some specialized help there. It can be a little intimidating, but if you have the right people, it really works. So if you aggregate all that, I think the total cost for me is about 40%, like a French engineer versus an American engineer doing the same job, same expertise. It's about that.
Okay. And Chris, just to talk more about the cosmopolitan region that is Paris region, you're part of a group with Station F around the international French tech. Can you tell us a bit more about that, and maybe about Station F that was created 4 years ago now and has really brought a lot of international profile to the Paris region tech scene?
Well, I totally agree with what Alexander is saying about Paris and France in general becoming more of an international space in terms of the workforce. My biggest problem, again, I moved here 7 years ago, and even since then, when I would meet young entrepreneurs, they'd hear my terrible French accent and want to be excited to speak English with me. And that's been a big challenge for me to convince people to speak French with me. So, it's great if you know the language or know a little bit, but you shouldn't let that be a hurdle, a barrier to coming here. Certainly with French Tech Mission, the official government agency that's in charge of French Tech, and Station F, they've really pushed the international viewpoint in terms of attracting talent here and trying to lower a lot of those barriers and create a community that will allow more international talent to come. It really is the official position of both the ecosystem and the government, really at all levels, that for the French tech ecosystem to thrive, it needs a lot of international talent. And so the welcome mat is out for people who want to come here. And then I think lastly, there's been a lot of work to reduce a lot of those administrative barriers for coming here. So it's, for me, the timing is ideal for someone thinking about this.
Yeah, great. And of course, we have the French Tech Visa, which is open for foreign entrepreneurs or foreign talents. Betty, is your team helping startup with the visas for international profiles?
Yeah, we can assist. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's not a lot. It's just a paperwork to do, so it's quite easy for us, but it's not a big deal. Yeah, you need to have a proper visa to be allowed to work in France, but you have to make sure. Maybe we will talk about that a bit later about labor law and things like that. But we have to make sure you have the right to work in France and go. No, it's not a big deal. I think you can have it. Most of the time you have it within 1 month.
When you want to have a talent, an employer, yeah. And if you are a founder who wants to come to France, do you have specific requisites that you have to have in mind, maybe in terms of a funding or something like that?
Regarding the visa?
Yeah.
No, you have to have a work permit. No, it's no, it's quite free actually. I didn't in all my clients. I've never experienced any difficulties with that. So,
okay.
No, yeah.
I think you have to make sure you have some money to get you started because as every country,
of
of course.
Of course.
And since you were mentioning labor law, what's the main difference you have to keep in mind when you're, an American entrepreneur or an American company and you start hiring in France? It can be different, the types of contract or, what's the main differences here?
Basically, the working hour in France is 35 hours per week. Executive, meaning management, upper management, can be on a forfeit status. There's 650 collective bargaining agreements depending on your sector and your activity. So you need to make sure that you respect the requirement of your collective agreement. And so the working hour is 35 hours per week. You can do up to 48 hours per week, but it will mean additional pay, supplementary pay. The basic contract is an open-ended contract, meaning permanent contract. You can have fixed-term contract, but you have to respect rules as well. So basically, everything is not that difficult, quite easy, but you have to respect rules, to respect the contract. So you have to ask a local advisor, or HR department, or HR payroll, or lawyer, to make sure that you respect the labor law rules and the collective bargaining agreement law rules. Otherwise, you can face some troubles with your employees. But it works, meaning that if you want to hire someone, your company must be set up before hiring. It's the basic. Sorry for the sorry. Sorry.
That's all right.
Your company must be set up. It sounds like stupid and like the very basic rule, but when you want to go on the market, to say, okay, I've got clients, I've got a contract, so I need to start now. Okay. Yes, but just wait a minute. You need to set up your company, and after you can hire your employee, because otherwise it's how can I say, black the employee.
Yeah. Yeah, so we see a lot of companies that just start their business with, maybe a freelancer, but you have to know that normally a freelancer is not supposed to work 100% of the time for you, but that's a way to start. But of course, as soon as you're getting traction, it's important to have, a proper business. And what would you recommend? We have different types of company in France. If I am a startup, what would I choose? Like SA, SAS, and what does that mean?
Basically, if you want to set up a company, if you want to invest the French market just to have or if you want only to do some research operation or thing like that, you can start with a liaison office. You are not. It's not compulsory to set up a permanent establishment. So if you don't want to create any revenue, any income in France, you can start with a liaison office, and after change it to a branch or a subsidiary. So the second step is a branch. It's only a taxable identity, no legal identity. So it's very easy to implement. It can be done within 1 and 2 months. And so it means that you will have to pay your taxes in France. It has a tax identity. So it's an independent company with a tax identity. The branch belongs to the foreign company. So it means it will be the result will be brought in the foreign company and to make one. And the last part is a subsidiary, which is a SRL, SAS, the two most famous one. And it depends on the group requirements. We need. There's not one solution. It really depends on the activity, on the goals, and if you just want to set up for 2 years, for 3 years, just for a short-time contract, maybe establishing subsidiaries is not compulsory. But if you want to make some tax optimization, maybe a French subsidiary can be good.
Yeah, we hope people will be staying more than 2 or 3 years. And so, Alex, what did you choose? What is the status of your French subsidiary?
It's a statute. It's a full subsidiary. We have a licensing agreement. So the statute makes sales in Europe, right? Because we're a medical device company, we have to sell. Once we get that certification, we're going to have to sell through European country. So we have a distribution agreement between the Inc., that the mother company in the US, and the statute in France. And we also have an IP development agreement. So the statute in France develops IP that is sold back to the mother company, right? Because it's important that the IP belongs to the company where investors invest, which is actually the Inc. So we have
Okay.
that combination. We actually, oddly enough, we're starting to do business in other parts of the world, like Japan, Australia, through France. Um, there's some technical details on the legal front, and also due to the fact that we're a medical device, but it's actually easier for us to do that right now. So we handle North America, South America from our Inc. and all the rest of the world through our French office.
Interesting. And I know one of the person attending today asked us a question prior to the webinar. I was like, well, is it difficult to create a company in France? They have this idea that there is a lot of bureaucracy. And so on my point of view, no. And since, also you have a lot of tech solution, no, you can create everything basically online. And Alexandre, you will tell us if you think that is okay. And I know you have a little story with the bank account. And can you tell us a bit more about that and how you solved this? Because at the end, you solved it.
So, I mean, I think there's two things I would say that are to keep in mind when you set up a subsidiary in France. One thing we didn't talk about before is the time it takes to hire people. People are really excellent, but on average, it takes you 3 to 4 months to get somebody on board. Because they have, it takes the interviews are all slower. In the US, when you hire someone, you like them, you hire them on Thursday, they're in the office on Monday, right? Or maybe the next Monday, right? They take like 2 days off, which is like big vacation here, right? So in France, there's a notice, right? They all have 3-month notice, so just be ready for that, right? You have to plan all your hiring around that, which is a little bit of a drag, right? On the other hand, the other thing that's really different is the amount of paperwork you need to incorporate your company. So I don't want to like be like too divisive on that, but it's really a lot more than in the US. Doesn't mean it's not manageable. Just be ready to sign like that much paper and initial every page. It's kind of I think we're gonna get rid of that at some point. Right now, there's still a lot of things that have to happen through paper in France, but in the US, everything is dematerialized. It's all online. But in France, it's not something that you need to do through paper, and there's more overhead, right? Again, it's manageable. Just means you have to have someone who knows how to do that and runs it. So I'm sure, Betty, you do that a lot. I've been working with the same person for the last 15 years, setting up subsidiaries and running our subsidiaries in France. HR is also a little different. You got to be a little more careful on some. I mean, the French labor law has made a lot of progress, but it still is a lot more stringent than in the US. So you still need to be, a little aware of all that and get the right help. And this is what I count in the overhead when I hire people in France. But it's totally manageable.
Yeah. And Chris, I didn't ask you, is the French Tech Journal a company, or did you have to go through the process of setting up an entity yourself?
I am about to go through the process. Maybe I should have a call with Betty about this after this. But basically, very briefly, I started off as a micro-entrepreneur in France, which is, for those who don't know, this was a reform a few years ago to simplify being independent, basically, because that traditionally has been quite hard in France to do. So if you're making below a certain threshold, you could be a micro-entrepreneur. I exceeded the revenue for that. So then I moved into an entreprise individuelle, which is kind of really a self-employed status just above that. And now I'm exploring some of the, for the French Tech Journal, exploring some of the configurations that we just talked about to figure out what is the optimal case in the event I want to hire someone and how I do that. And I would say just thematically, what you're hearing is correct. Things need to be done the right way here. You can't just sort of improvise stuff, because that's both going to penalize your company, but it also puts the employees at risk. It's very important that they be set up correctly, because they will need the right paperwork in turn to get things like a bank account and a cell phone and a loan, depending on how long they're staying. So you want to make sure at the beginning all those things are in place, so that when you hire these people, they can not run into issues later. Because again, we can talk about tech and the government, but there are still these parts of the economy, like the bank system, that's very traditional in terms of what they expect you to see and present when you're doing something as basic as opening an account. So, and then the same with the tax system, which can be very easy, but if you're not set up correctly, can be difficult.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I wanted to come back on you mentioned hiring. You have to wait for people to leave their previous company if they're employed because they have this notice period. And we often have the question, is it difficult to terminate a contract in France? So I think labor law has evolved in France. And Betty, can you explain? So we have this permanent contract, we have short-term contract. That means you can hire somebody for 3 or 6 months also to test them. But if you need to terminate a contract, I think 10 years ago there was this mutual agreement that was quite new. Can you tell us a bit more how it works and how it facilitates, this kind of situation?
Okay, before that there was a resignation coming from the employee or the layout coming from the employer with indemnities and things like that. And now from, as you say, like 10 years, I think it's a bit less, but something like 10 years indeed, there's a rupture conventionnelle, which is a mutual termination of contract. And it means that both the employer and the employee agrees to finish the contract. They fix an amount of indemnities, and that can be, it's the minimum, the same indemnities like for a layout. So it means 1/4 salary per year of seniority. So it's not a big deal actually. And so the notice period, the employer and the employee determine the termination date, and the notice period can be shorter to 1 month, 1 month and a half, because there's a retroaction period of 15 days, and you have to apply to the government body to ask for the agreement, and so it's 1 month. It can be done. Yeah, so it's easy, and it means that if the employee normally, it means that if the employee agrees with the mutual agreement, he won't go to the labor court.
Yes, and he will benefit from unemployment
coverage.
Exactly, which is not the case if he resign. And so in France, it's quite important because we have a lot of support. And I have a question for you all, because we mentioned people, they have notice period, but I have the impression that French people, once they are in a company, tend to be more loyal than American people that kind of change company every year and a half. Is this something true or true now within the tech world? What do you think?
It depends. It depends on the, how the market is, right? So, I think this is changing. Honestly, I think it was the case 10 years ago. I think it's still different now. I have employees now. The market is on fire right now. It's really hard to find people, and a lot of companies raise a lot of money. All the unicorns raising $500 million. So they pay really big salaries, and they try to poach, right? So. So it's starting to be like in the US, right? So an employee gets an offer or gets approached by another company with a massive salary, you're gonna have to align. You're gonna have to raise. So that happened to me recently. So I raised the whole team, and I think the loyalty thing. So I'm seeing two trends, right? One trend, which is the really good guys now or girls, they tend to shy away from CDI and want to be contractors, which is not necessarily good. I mean, it means that it's more flexible. You can hire people faster, but you don't have them on board. So I'm seeing that more and more. It's more competitive, right? I mean, so for example, we have there's a trial period in any employment contract in France. That's I think 4 months by default, and you can extend it to 7 months. So we do that by default for everyone, right? Because we want to make sure we know people well. Like during the trial period, you can let people go almost overnight. And so it's much more flexible. So we want to make sure that we know people really well before we completely commit. It's becoming a little hard now with the competitive market. They're like, oh no, I got other offers with only like 3 months of trial period, so I want to get that, right? So the French, especially for engineers, the French labor market is becoming a little more competitive. So I would say yes, the trends are still that people tend to stay longer. You rarely see people who stay like 6 months in a company, then another 6 months, because then they got fired during the trial period, and it's not a good sign.
Yeah.
So they stay a little longer, but you see more and more resume with people staying like a year here, a year there, and so yeah, it's not as brutal as in the US, where somebody will just not show at the office one day and they're just somewhere else, right? They're competitors, just left. But it's changing.
Okay, yeah, thank you for this insight. And as we approach the hour, yes, please ask your question if you have any in the question tab. And otherwise, I want to address more cultural differences. We talked a bit about that already, but maybe Chris, as an American who moved to France, what were your impression about the difference with the French people, and in particular in business? How did you feel it goes differently, or do you have to address people in a certain way? Did you feel the hierarchy? I know you're like in a journalist job, but what was your impression of all that?
Well, this has changed a bit, but it does tend to be fundamentally a bit more formal business culture here. In a place like Station F, for example, you might not see people wearing ties as much, but again, I know if I'm going to a meeting that's going to be someone from the government's going to be there, there's sort of an expectation that I'll put on a jacket and possibly a tie, and people address each other more formally just in general. I mean, in the US, I dash off an email like, "Hey, Daphne, what's going on?" And if I don't know you well, I'll write a very formal email to you here, even from PR people and stuff like that. The language, as we discussed before, I think that's changing a bit. But there are other great positive things that I love here. I mean, one of them is around food and eating. We all in the US eat at our desks during lunch, and you take about 15 minutes for lunch. And here, even when I go to co-working spaces, people stop at 12:30 and they get up and they go for an hour, which was so hard for me to accept when I first moved here, because I was so anxious that I was not getting work done and everyone's just sitting around chatting. But there's a bit more emphasis, I think, on a work-life balance than there is in Silicon Valley, where it is work, and that's what you're supposed to do until you've made it. So, there's just big and little things like that, I think. And then, Alexander, I think, was joking about this before, but, vacations are treasured here. I mean, even if you're in a startup, I think it's something you have to think about in terms of, if you were an American entrepreneur and a founder in Paris, for instance, and you're, 3 employees are going to take off for the month of August, you have to have a conversation with them about what your expectation is and what the law is, frankly, and how you sort of accommodate that, because that is, it's unfortunately, outside of France, people say, oh, well, the French are so lazy. I don't think that's it at all. I think it's just such a fundamental value here that you find the right live-work balance.
Mm-hmm. And actually, productivity in France is quite high. So it means like when people are working, they're really working. And they have also a right to disconnect. I don't know if Betty, you're familiar with that, and you can tell us what it is.
The right to disconnect is the right to switch off your devices, your laptop, your mobile phone, and to have your personal life without being pop up by emails, professional emails, or phone calls. So when your working daytime is over, it is over.
Yeah. I can add a couple of things on that. So one thing I want to debunk is, I think over a given day, French employee will work a lot more than a US employee, right? In Silicon Valley, you work a lot, but then at 4 o'clock, you clock out, right? You're gone, right? I mean, you start early in the morning, you start at 8, but Americans tend to have shorter days, but fewer vacations, right? So it's just a different way of seeing work. I mean, overall, I agree with you, Chris. The work-life balance is not the same, and I think, but still, there's some interesting aspects like that. Like for a given day, I think the French will work many more hours actually than on average than American. So and then you have to explain. So the way you understand days off is also different. Like in the US, you need to take like 2 hours to take your kids to the doctor. You just go and come back, right? In France, you will take a half day, right? There's some cultural thing. When you have Americans and French people in the company, you have to manage that, right? So I think the funny thing that constantly happens is sense of humor. That's a that's a big difference. I always have to explain when a French guy makes a joke during a team meeting. I always have to say this was a joke. And the other way around. So that's pretty funny.
Yeah, I found humor. I'll be moderating events and I'll make a joke on stage and it's nothing. And then I'm like, oh, and then people afterwards will be like, oh, that was really funny. Like, really?
Yeah, that's right.
Nobody says this. That's one thing. And then the other thing, in the U.S., you're sort of taught this. This is not true of all startups, certainly, but you're taught this sort of encouraging management style. It used to be in newsrooms. There was sort of this thing like, before I criticize you, I'm going to say 3 nice things about your work. And here, it's often just like, I think it's a function of the education system, but it's all about the corrige. It's all about like, you did this wrong and you did this wrong, and you think, oh, it's been a disaster. No, we love what you were doing, but it's very focused on just fixing the mistakes, and so you don't necessarily have that what we call in the U.S. that sort of patting on the back sort of style of management where they're saying, hey, you're wonderful, and just wanted to say you're doing great today, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Trophy culture, right? Kids in the US, when they play soccer, all the team, every kid gets a trophy, right? Just for being that.
Yeah, you don't get that in France.
Oh no. Well,
in the US, everything is amazing. It's like, it's a huge cultural difference. And just to go back a bit on business, I wanted to ask you, Alex, how should you go about building relationship with corporate? Is it really different in France than in the US when you do your business development? Do you have any tips for entrepreneurs looking to sign clients in France?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's very different. And I'm on the side. I help a venture partner with a couple of VCs and help companies go to the US. And there's 2 major differences, I think. Expectation in terms of customer support. Like in the US, when a customer has a problem, whatever the time on the weekend, whatever if it's midnight on a Sunday night, you have to pick up the phone and fix it. Right? Expectation in terms of how you take care of your customers are much higher here. In France, you'll understand that people are off and you can wait 3-4 days before they fix a problem. That doesn't happen here, right? So that's pretty classic for all companies who move here. The other thing is business happens a lot through your own customers, right? It's a lot more, building up your network and having successful customers that will talk about you, and that will help you build more business in the US. It's a little less like that in France. It's also super important, but this is how you get leads here, right? In France, you always, and in Europe in general, you always have to go through a lead acquisition process where you're going to go to trade shows or send emails, and that's how you're going to get leads. In the US, you can completely do without that at the beginning, at least. For the first, let's say, 10 customers. It's a lot more, word of mouth. So, which is why the way you handle customer success and customer support is also super critical to your growth here. That's I would say it's a major difference.
Okay. And I see it's nearly the end of the event. I will check question. Yeah, Arietta, you can reach out to Choose Paris Region. We'll help you set up the VC fund in Paris, absolutely. And so maybe to wrap up, I just wanted to ask if you have any tips that we have not addressed yet for US companies looking to enter the French market and set up a business. What would be your advice, or what would be things to avoid? I don't know. We'll start on that.
I'll jump in on that.
Yeah.
I mean, it just coming back to some of the themes we've touched on, I do think you have to be mentally prepared for what Alexander was sort of describing, that paperwork aspect, the sort of administrative parts. Is, it's gotten a lot better, and it still could be better, and I think it will get better over time. But at the same time, don't let that dissuade you or overwhelm you. France and Paris are very much in a mode of wanting to help you figure these things out. And frankly, a few years ago, that wasn't the case. You were very much left on your own to try to navigate these things. I went through that again when I was just figuring out, how do I set up as an independent in France? I think the country, the economy, the governments at all levels are really in a mode, to this. I mean, this webinar is an example of that, right? To demystify how these things work and help you get through these. So the obstacles that you will encounter can be overcome, and people are here to help you do that.
And so we have totally agree with that, Chris. And one thing I would add, though, is be careful that one risk that's still a legitimate one is, if you start a company and you're going to exit the company at some point, you really have to make sure IP is well managed between your French entity and the US entity. Because that's still some pretty tricky part of the process of setting up a transatlantic company. So be careful with that. Outside of that, honestly, I think the world has changed a lot, and you can raise money if you're an American company. You can raise money with French VCs. American VCs now invest in French companies too. It's all much more interconnected now, which is for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah, and I would say I would add to ask counsel of a local advisor, because it can be very easy, but it can also be very tricky if you miss something. Like some years ago, I had a UK company wanted to set up in France, and they planned to hire 60 people, nurses, to do some research on some specific disease, and the nurses was supposed to take some bloods testing to patients, blah blah blah, and everything was done. We are on the stage to prepare the contract of employment, and the UK companies told me, "Oh, I want 100% flexible hours," which is the very basic French rule that it's not possible at all. It's not possible. And so all the business, so be very transparent and on all the process, so you can have some good advice, because with their mindset, it was obvious that it was allowed to do that. And with my French culture, our French culture, we didn't mention, okay, it's 35 hours per week compulsory, except some very special cases. And so, okay, the only solution was to require freelances, but the nurses it wasn't the expectation. So yeah, it can be. So you need to ask some counsel, and it will be good.
Yeah, in particular, if you're working in a regulated industry like healthcare or finance, you must want
real estate.
check exactly. And I mean, the team at Choose Paris Region is here to provide this first information about your market, the key people there, the business organization, the regulation, and more on the business side, the events you should go to, incubator or accelerator that are welcoming international entities. We didn't have time to talk about that today, but there are a lot. So I really encourage you to reach out to us, Guy. Cécile is actually sharing with you the contact details for all of the speakers. I invite you to subscribe to Chris French Tech Journal, and he also has a podcast with Ethan Pierce, which is another American in Paris. So really, guys, I encourage you to listen to that. We're sharing also Betty's website, Setting Up Your Business in France. They have some videos to help you, go deeper in all the topics we addressed today. And you have also our email, so reach out to really set up your French entity. And Alex, we share your LinkedIn, so you can follow Alex and see his adventure, Norbert's journey in France, in the US, and throughout the world, because you're already in Japan, so that is quite amazing. And so I really wanted to thank all of you. It was really interesting. We had a nice chat, and I hope today people in the chat got some useful insight as well. And so thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you soon in Paris, New York, or wherever.
Ciao.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.